The uninvited guest. Mia's small apartment in downtown Los Angeles was her sanctuary, a cozy, quiet space tucked away from the bustling city streets below. Despite the constant noise and activity outside, her building had an eerie stillness at night, a stark contrast that often made her feel more isolated than secure. As a college student in her early 20s, Mia was independent and accustomed to living alone. She enjoyed her solitude but relied on the comfort of her close friendship with Carlos, who frequently checked in on her, especially when she returned home late. After a fun night out with Carlos, Mia arrived at her apartment to find the door slightly ajar. Her heart skipped a beat, and unease crept in. She pushed the door open cautiously, scanning the familiar space. Everything seemed normal at first, but as she ventured further inside, she noticed muddy footprints trailing from the entrance to her bedroom. Panic surged through her. Without hesitation, she grabbed her phone and called Carlos, her voice trembling as she asked him to come over immediately. Carlos arrived at Mia's apartment within minutes, his worry clear as he hurried inside. Mia's anxiety was contagious, and without wasting any time, they began to search the small space together. They moved from room to room, carefully checking behind doors and inside closets, their senses on high alert. Despite the muddy footprints leading from the entrance, they found no sign of an intruder. Every door was securely locked, and the windows were closed tight. The apartment on the surface seemed perfectly normal. No broken glass, no signs of a struggle, nothing out of place. But the tension in the air was palpable. As they searched, Mia's unease grew, a gnawing sense of dread tightening in her chest. The muddy footprints stopped abruptly at her bedroom door, an ominous trail that led nowhere. Carlos, trying to calm her, suggested that maybe she had somehow tracked the mud in herself without realizing it. But the explanation felt hollow. The unsettling feeling lingered, heavy and oppressive. They stood in the dimly lit hallway, both struggling to shake off the sensation that something, or someone, was still there, lurking just out of sight. Carlos could see the fear in Mia's eyes and tried his best to reassure her. "Everything's fine," he said gently. "There's no one here but us. You're safe." He offered to stay longer, but Mia, eager to regain her sense of normalcy and independence, insisted that she'd be okay once she locked up and got some rest. As they talked, the tension slowly began to dissipate. The familiar comfort of Carlos's presence made Mia feel a little foolish for having overreacted. They shared a nervous laugh, brushing off the strange incident as a misunderstanding or a trick of Mia's tired mind. "Maybe it was just my imagination running wild," she said with a small smile, trying to convince herself as much as Carlos. The thought that she might have tracked in the mud without noticing began to seem plausible, and the eerie feeling that had settled over the apartment started to lift, if only slightly. As Carlos prepared to leave, Mia walked him to the door, grateful for his help. He turned to her before stepping out, his tone serious once more. "Call me if anything else happens. Okay? I'll come back right away." Mia nodded, reassured by his words. She locked the door behind him, sliding the deadbolt into place with a sense of finality. The apartment was quiet again, and though she felt more secure, a small, lingering unease remained in the back of her mind, an instinctual warning that something was still not right. As Mia began to relax, the silence in her apartment was broken by a faint, rhythmic sound breathing. She froze, dismissing it at first as her imagination, but the sound grew louder, more distinct. Her heart pounded as she turned slowly toward her bedroom door. There, standing just inside the doorway, was the masked intruder, his imposing figure filling the small space. In his hand, a knife glinted ominously in the dim light. The intruder's heavy breathing filled the room as he took a step closer to Mia. Paralyzed by fear, she could barely move, her body locked in place as the terror consumed her. The tension mounted as he closed the distance, his presence overwhelming. The darkness seemed to close in around her as the cold blade pressed against her back, the sharp, chilling sensation signaling the end she could no longer escape. The world plunged into blackness, her fate sealed in the silent, suffocating void. The Wrong House, the suburban neighborhood in Austin, Texas, where Mark and Jenna lived, was the picture of tranquility. The quiet streets were bathed in the warm glow of streetlights, casting long shadows that added to the serene ambience. Inside their cozy home, Mark, a young professional in his late 20s, and his girlfriend Jenna were spending a typical evening together. The soft hum of the television and their light-hearted conversation filled the living room, wrapping them in a cocoon of comfort and safety. Their peaceful night was shattered by loud, frantic pounding on the front door. Startled and confused, Mark got up to check, but before he could reach the door, it burst open with a force that sent a jolt of fear through him. A man stumbled inside, his eyes wide with terror. He was holding a gun, his hands shaking as he ranted incoherently about someone following him. His words were a jumble of paranoia and desperation, and in his disoriented state, he mistook Mark for someone else, escalating the tension and danger in an instant. Mark's heart raced, but he knew he had to stay calm. He slowly raised his hands, speaking softly to the intruder. "Hey, it's okay, you're safe here," he said, his voice steady despite the fear tightening his chest. The man's erratic behavior, however, made it clear that he was deeply troubled. His grip on the gun was tight, his eyes darting around the room as if expecting someone to jump out at any moment. The intruder's confusion only grew, and his paranoia deepened. He began accusing Mark of being involved with the people he believed were chasing him, his voice rising with each accusation. Mark tried to reassure him, but every word seemed to push the man closer to the edge. The situation teetered on the brink of violence, and Mark struggled to maintain a sense of control, knowing that one wrong move could trigger a disaster. Seeing the growing tension, Jenna knew she had to act. She carefully stepped forward, her voice gentle and soothing. "You're in the wrong house, but we're here to help you," she said, keeping her movements slow and deliberate. She acknowledged his fear and confusion, validating his emotions rather than dismissing them. Her calm, empathetic approach began to break through the man's panic. His wild eyes softened slightly, and the tension in his body started to ease. Jenna continued to speak softly, reassuring him that no one was after him and that he was safe. Gradually, the intruder's grip on the gun loosened. Jenna's calm demeanor brought him back from the edge, and he began to lower the weapon, his breaths coming slower as he started to trust that they were not his enemies. With the intruder slightly calmer, Mark and Jenna exchanged subtle glances, silently agreeing on a strategy to keep him occupied and safe until help arrived. They knew any sudden movement or wrong word could reignite his fear, so they carefully steered the conversation away from his paranoia and toward reassuring him of his safety. Mark, maintaining a calm demeanor, subtly reached for his phone and discreetly sent a text to the police, describing the situation and urging them to approach quietly. The tension in the room was palpable, with every movement and word measured carefully to avoid startling the intruder. As they continued to talk, the man began to open up, his voice trembling as he shared fragments of his past. He mentioned his time in the military, describing the horrors he had faced and the toll it had taken on him. His words were disjointed, but the pain and fear were clear. It became apparent that he was suffering from PTSD, and that his current state was the result of a severe flashback. Jenna listened intently, her expression full of genuine concern. She nodded encouragingly, validating his experiences and making him feel heard. Her empathy seemed to soothe him further, his agitation slowly giving way to a fragile calm. The clock ticked slowly, with each second feeling like an eternity as they waited for the authorities to arrive. Mark and Jenna continued their delicate balancing act, knowing they had to maintain this fragile peace until the police could take over. The police arrived quietly, surrounding the house without alarming the intruder. Mark and Jenna kept him engaged, their voices calm and steady as they reassured him that he was safe and that no one was after him. The officers, sensing the delicate situation, entered the home with a calm, non-threatening presence, their movements careful and deliberate. Recognizing the signs of PTSD, they approached the man with understanding and patience. With Jenna's continued reassurance, the man finally lowered the gun, his grip loosening as he allowed the police to take it from him. The officers handled him gently, guiding him into custody without resistance, aware of his fragile mental state. As he was led away, Mark and Jenna were left standing in the now quiet living room, shaken but unharmed. They watched the police car drive off into the night, feeling a deep sense of relief and compassion for the man who had unknowingly brought terror into their home. The night returned to its previous calm, but with a newfound appreciation for their safety and for each other. The Silent Watcher. The cabin stood deep within the dense Oregon woods, surrounded by towering pines that seemed to stretch endlessly into the sky. The isolation was profound, with the only sounds being the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. The cabin, though small and cozy, carried an unsettling air due to its remoteness, as if the vastness of the forest might swallow it, and its occupants whole. The solitude was precisely what Lucas, a writer in his early 40s, sought when he rented the cabin to work on his novel. He was looking for inspiration, a place far removed from the distractions of city life. His girlfriend, Olivia, joined him for a weekend getaway, hoping to enjoy some peaceful time together. One evening, as Lucas sat at his desk, the soft glow of his laptop the only light in the room, he glanced up from his writing and froze. Outside the window, partially obscured by the darkness, was a shadowy figure standing still, watching them. The figure didn't move, remaining shrouded in shadow, making it impossible for Lucas to discern any details. His heart skipped a beat, but he quickly brushed it off as a trick of the light or his imagination running wild after hours of writing. When he mentioned it to Olivia, her unease was immediate. She urged him to leave the cabin with her, sensing something wasn't right. But Lucas, dismissing her concerns, reassured her that they were safe and that it was nothing to worry about. The next morning, Olivia's unease turned into dread when she stepped outside and saw something that made her blood run cold. Footprints in the snow, circling the cabin. The prints were fresh, clearly defined in the crisp snow, and they led all around the house, as if someone had been pacing or watching them throughout the night. Yet, there were no other signs of disturbance, no broken windows, and no forced entry. Olivia's heart raced as she called Lucas to come and see. When Lucas joined her, he tried to stay calm, suggesting that the footprints could belong to a hiker or a hunter passing through the woods. But his voice lacked conviction, and the discovery only heightened the tension between them. Olivia remained on edge, her instincts screaming that someone was out there, watching them. The feeling of being observed, combined with the eerie isolation of the cabin, gnawed at her, and she couldn't shake the growing fear. As the day wore on, the atmosphere inside the cabin grew increasingly oppressive. Every creak of the wooden floors, every rustle of the trees outside seemed amplified, filling the air with tension. Olivia's anxiety began to seep into Lucas, who found it harder to dismiss her concerns. They both started to question whether they were truly alone in the woods. The idea of leaving early crossed their minds more than once, but Lucas hesitated, determined to make the most of his time at the cabin for his writing. Olivia, however, couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, her fear becoming more palpable with each passing hour. As the unease between them grew unbearable, Lucas and Olivia finally decided to pack up and leave the cabin earlier than planned. The decision brought a brief sense of relief, as if leaving the woods would break the strange spell that had been cast over them. But just as they were zipping up their bags, a new sound froze them in place. the unmistakable creak of footsteps on the roof. The noise was slow and deliberate, each step echoing through the quiet cabin as if someone was purposefully moving above them. Olivia's face went pale, her worst fears confirmed. "Lucas, we have to go now," she whispered urgently, her voice shaking. But Lucas, despite the terror gnawing at his gut, felt a surge of determination. Grabbing a flashlight, he insisted on investigating the attic, convinced it was an animal or something explainable. Olivia pleaded with him to leave it alone, her voice rising in desperation, but he couldn't let it go. He had to confront whatever was up there, if only to prove that their fears were unfounded. Climbing the narrow stairs to the attic, Lucas's heart pounded in his chest. The flashlight's beam cut through the darkness, revealing dusty rafters and old boxes stacked haphazardly. But as he moved the light across the space, what he found made his blood run cold. Behind a pile of old furniture, there were clear signs that someone had been living there. A tattered blanket spread out on the floor, crumpled food wrappers, and a makeshift bed hidden in the shadows. The air in the attic was thick with the musty smell of stale sweat and decay, confirming that this wasn't a fleeting presence but something, or someone, who had been there for a while. The realization hit Lucas like a punch to the gut. They hadn't been alone in the cabin. Someone had been watching them, living above them in the attic while they went about their days, oblivious to the danger lurking just overhead. Panic surged through him as he scrambled back down the stairs, nearly tripping in his haste. "We have to leave. Now," he gasped, his voice tight with fear. Olivia was waiting at the bottom of the stairs, her eyes wide with anxiety. Without a word, they both grabbed their remaining belongings, no longer caring about anything other than getting away from the cabin as fast as possible. The cozy retreat they had hoped for had turned into a nightmare, and all that mattered now was escaping whatever was hiding in the shadows of the attic. Lucas and Olivia raced out of the cabin, their fear driving them forward as they frantically threw their bags into the trunk of the car. The once peaceful retreat now felt like a sinister trap, the walls of the cabin closing in behind them as they fled. The trees around them, which had once seemed tranquil, now loomed menacingly in the fading light. Lucas fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking as he finally started the engine. The car roared to life, but just as they were about to pull away, Olivia caught something in the rearview mirror that made her blood run cold. Standing in the shadows behind the car was the same figure Lucas had seen outside the window, motionless and watching them. The figure began to move closer, emerging from the darkness with slow, deliberate steps. Though the face remained obscured, the intent was unmistakable. This was no ordinary passerby. The tension in the car was suffocating, every second stretching into an eternity as the figure drew nearer. As the figure suddenly lunged toward the car, Olivia's scream pierced the night, filling the confined space with terror. Lucas slammed his foot on the gas, but the car didn't move, paralyzed by fear just as they were. The last image burned into Olivia's mind was the figure's shadowy form etched in the rearview mirror, its outstretched hand inches from the glass. The screen cuts to black, leaving their fate shrouded in darkness, with only the echo of her scream lingering in the silence.